Hi, this is Dr. David Fazzino at Bloomsburg University, and I'd like to, in this lecture, go over some general considerations to keep in mind as an ethnographer. This is specifically for Field Methods in Cultural Anthropology course being taught at Bloomsburg University. And when we're doing ethnography and when we're working through ethnographic fieldwork and producing ethnographies, ethnographic accounts in a variety of different forms, we have many things to keep in mind. In this lecture, I'm going to touch on some of those key aspects to keep in mind as you progress in your first or second fieldwork in cultural anthropology. So specifically, what I'd like to cover in this screencast is to address what exactly is ethnography, what constitutes ethnography. And I will point out at the very beginning here that I'm drawing from Madison's text, Critical Ethnography, in large part for much of the information for the screencast. There's a reference at the end which will encourage, and I'm encouraging you to, of course, read the required course materials as well as pick up the text as a whole and read through it overall. We'll look at not only the central questions to critical ethnography, but where this actually arises from. Three different positions in ethnographic research, as well as thinking more broadly about three models of research. So what is it that we're actually doing? What are our commitments when we're participating as an anthropologist in ethnographic fieldwork and in the entire process of doing this work, of writing various drafts, various iterations of our fieldwork experience. And as Russ Bernard notes, and others have noted too, field work and field notes are necessarily reductive. They're reductive of the entire experience of what it means to be in the field. And you can just do this and just think about this as in general. If you were to write down, for example, a journal account and keep rather meticulous notes, you would be hard pressed to capture all of the nuances and details of what it is that you have actually experienced over the course of a day in total. It's necessarily reductive, it's necessarily selective. And this is something that we'll be going over the course of the semester as a whole and thinking about. In addition, what I'd like to do in the screencast is to consider both objectivity and subjectivity, and to also contemplate, to begin to contemplate the nexus of methods as well as theory. And again, a lot of this comes from Madison's text, Critical Ethnography. So what is ethnography? Well, an ethnography is a text about a particular group of people with whom the ethnographer is intimately familiar. Typically, this means that they've spent a year or more in the field working with a particular group of people, studying particular aspects of their culture overall. We can contrast this with ethnology, which is a review of several ethnographic texts. Probably the most notable of this would be the Human Relations Area Files, HRAF, and Murdoch's work. But we also see other pieces that cover many different ethnographies and bring them together under a general theme or idea. This is ethnology, a comparison of various ethnographies. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that whether or not something actually claims to be ethnographic, it is nevertheless ethnographic to the extent that you are actually having a person go out into a field, into a particular setting, spending some sort of time with people or in the place, and then utilizing interpretation to tell a particular story. And depending on where this is going to be published and how this is going to be published or how the story is going to be told, there are a variety of filters which these accounts will emerge and will be told. Now, as anthropologists, one of the things that we'll get to think about over the course of this class in field methods and cultural anthropology is to try to develop some of the skills to think reflexively and critically about our own intentions, about how those are good. And we might bring those to the table. We might have excellent craftsmanship in terms of our ability to write, in terms of our ability to convey information through visual anthropology methods, through both still images as well as videos. And we might also have the reliability and eloquence of a particular story. Typically, we work with key informants, key individuals that we become rather close with, become intimate with, and tell their story. And it might be a very true story for that particular individual. But the thing to keep in mind is that representing others as single individuals, as groups of individuals, and even when we are very refined in what it is that we're trying to convey, it is nevertheless always going to be a complicated and contentious event when we work with other people. And this can have a variety of different forms that ethnography can take, and I highlighted some of these before. Of course, you have your full monograph, the ethnography, a full text, short essays, journal articles, still images, and films. But still, regardless of the form, there are consequences to the production of each one of these things, as well as their dissemination through particular outlets. Hence, we must be in some way accountable for our representations and the implications of our message. And of course, to keep in mind that these things, once they are out there, to a large extent, they are not within our control anymore either. In other words, we might produce an ethnographic account, but that, of course, is not the final word, as it were. And of course, our own work can then be reinterpreted and utilized. The aforementioned discussion of ethnology, for example. So when we're thinking about ethnography, what it is that we're thinking about is not only the final product, in terms of our own, the text, the monograph, the still images, the video, and that, but also the process that we go through, our ethnographic field methods, or our field research. And then we also have to consider as well the implications that go along with this. So we can see that the ethnography and its production is, it might be solidified with a particular publication, but of course that's not the end of the story overall. According to Madison, there are 5 central questions that ethnographers must consider if they're going to be engaged in critical ethnography. The first of which is, how do we reflect on and upon and evaluate our own purpose, intentions, and frames of analysis as researchers? In other words, through what lens are we viewing our particular work, and how are we somewhat critical of that and thinking about that? How do we potentially predict what are the consequences of our own potential to do harm? And of course, this is the importance of having ethical review boards, of having peer review, of and in just in more of a informal sense, also collaborating with peers in the context of writing up in terms of dissertation or master's theses, writing support workshop groups, in terms of doing classroom exercises to improve our analytical skills, to improve our reflections and our ability to analyze and think about our own work. And also, we all bring to the table our own particular experiences, and with that, our own potential blind spots that we might not see. How do we create and maintain a dialogue of collaboration in our research projects between ourselves and others? So the idea that once are you implementing on or are you implementing with in terms of a research design? And then what is going to be the process of participation, not only for yourself as an ethnographer in terms of participant observation, but also for those with whom you work, your so-called informants, in terms of how they are going to potentially collaborate throughout the research process. And the fourth consideration is, how is the specificity of the local story relevant to the broader meanings and operations of the human condition? And this is I think a big question, because our work is often so specific and so focused on a particular area. At least in terms of quote-unquote traditional fieldwork experience, how do we scale up? And one of the answers of this within anthropology, of course, has been to engage in a more of a multi-sided approach within ethnographic fieldwork. In other words, trying to get the story from multiple different angles, using material, archival work, this sort of thing, to think about the various products that humans have produced over time and incorporate that into our overall analysis. Finally, how and in what location or through what intervention will our work make the greatest contribution to equity, freedom, and justice? And I mean, the other thing to think about, this is again from Madison here, is, do equity, freedom, and justice matter in terms of your commitments as an ethnographer, in terms of the field work that you want to be producing overall? So again, in summary here, I think we can think about this in a general sense about our overall engagement as well as commitment, thinking about our own purposes and intentions as well as frames of analysis, our own potential to do harm, the overarching dialogue of collaboration in the context of research projects, the overall relevance to the human condition, and questions of equity, justice, and freedom. From Fine's 1994 work in Madison, there are three positions in ethnographic research. The first of which is the so-called ventriloquist stance. In this, the ethnographer aims to be invisible. The self just attempts to be invisible within the text itself. So a lot of the early accounts, sort of the idea of an omniscient, omnipresent ethnographer that doesn't necessarily occupy any position at all, is just merely an observer, is merely recording the information overall. The second is the personality of voices, which is the position of the ethnographer is vaguely present, but is not actually addressed in full. The voices of the subjects carry forward so-called indigenous meanings in opposition to dominant discourses and practices. So here you can see in this an attempt to give a voice to those who might not otherwise have a voice through particular products, through particular ethnographic products. The final of the three positions in ethnographic research, according to Fine, is the activism stance, in which the ethnographer takes a clear position in intervening on hegemonic practices and will serve as an advocate in exposing the material effects of marginalized locations while offering potential alternatives. So if we think about these three in relation to one another, we can think about this as the idea of voice, and the extent to which the ethnographer's voice is present or not, the extent to which the voice of those with whom we're working is present or not, and what this is going to mean in terms of the overall production of an ethnography, in terms of what methods will also be potentially valuable to utilize. So you can see here, and this is sort of foreshadowing where we're going in the rest of what will be the next screencast, is to think about how methods and theory intersect with one another, and how theoretical predispositions can inform the particular types of methodology that we will utilize as ethnographers to try to come to say something about the field sites within which we are working.